Thank you. Go for it.
That was like a nobody move moment. Nobody breathe. Nobody do anything. I love it. This is real life. Okay, thank you for that. Are we good? Yay. Okay, splendid. Thank you so much. So, the first reading that I chose is to contextualize a little bit about my philosophy when it comes to disability activism. And it's actually right from the introduction of the book, page 3, right off the bat. And so, I hope that this helps offer a little bit of perspective into how it is that I perceive our responsibility as disabled people to engage when it comes to the disability experience. All of us, non-disabled and disabled people alike, have more to learn about how to make the world a better, more accessible, more inclusive place. So how do we do this? There's a philosophy I've come to embrace that informs everything I do. If the disability community wants a world that's accessible to us, then we must make ideas and experiences of disability accessible to the world. How can we expect understanding and acceptance of disability if we aren't willing to share our insights and our stories? I recognize this isn't always a popular line of thought among many disabled people. Educating others about the nuances of your daily life is a heck of a lot of work, and it can take an emotional toll, especially when there's pushback, or the people who need to listen, or the people who need to learn just won't listen. It makes sense not to want to live our lives moving from one teachable moment to the next. We'd prefer to just live our lives, period. However, the reality is that we're not quite there yet. Whether I'm out and about in the world at large or just aimlessly scrolling through social media, I'm on high alert for ableism, stereotypes, stigma, and discrimination toward disabled people. And there's a lot of it to be found. So for now, I believe that offering honest and sincere guidance and conversation remains a key part of the path forward for the disability community. That's how progress has been made by the powerhouse disability activists who have come before me. It's how we will continue forward. And if one person who reads this book thinks better of using disability as a slur or insult, or calls their representatives to advocate for a disability issue, or adds a ramp to the entrance of their shop, then we're moving in the right direction.
Wow, that was a very deep and thoughtful reflection. I loved how you echoed that disability justice is a shared responsibility among everybody, and showed a dedication and commitment to storytelling and to embody our lived experience into policy, into the world we see. So thank you for sharing that beautiful excerpt.
Thank you so much for that response. And I also really want to emphasize again that I recognize that disabled people don't simply exist as teachable moments, right? That's not our job to embody, living, breathing education, right? But at the same time, I think what we tend to forget is that we all have a role to play in meeting people where they're at. Disability is something that I think is still a little bit unsettling to people simply because we see stigma surrounding us. We don't yet see enough of that positive representation. And without that positive representation, much of which we are, leading the way on, having these conversations about, how are we ever going to get to that place of acceptance? And so my hope is that while I don't think anybody owes anything of themselves to anyone, at the same time, we'll begin to open up these dialogues and these conversations about something that might feel a little bit unfamiliar and make it less unfamiliar because it's just part of the human experience.
I love that. And I will highlight and uplift the chat that was just shared by Keith. I came here to learn, Emily, and appreciate your insight. Right now, I am trying to figure out how to balance disclosing I have a disability at work because I get nervous about discrimination. Your words speak true, though.
I think that's such a good point, Keith. I mean, there have been a lot of times when I'm a bit hesitant to raise the point that I'm disabled and I want to be, very out in the open about that identity and proud about that identity, because I worry about the ramifications of other people's stigma and discrimination. I would also say that the only way that we're going to create a culture in which disability is part of the fold without having to shy away from embracing it is by beginning to communicate and tell those stories. It's kind of it's a cycle, right? It's almost a catch-22, because to create a culture that feels more inclusive of everyone, we have to begin to share our stories. But in order to feel comfortable sharing our stories, we want a more inclusive culture. And so it's kind of that push-pull of how do we find that middle ground. I wonder if anybody else has any thoughts they'd like to share. I want this to feel like an open conversation. I know it's hard when you're just, boxes on a screen, but if not, I do have another excerpt that I would love to read. All right. On that note, I am going to read, Mackenzie, yeah, meeting people where they are. That's a challenging one too, right? Because sometimes you don't necessarily want to always meet people where they are. When you get a little bit in your head about it and you say, I am burnt out and I am tired and I have done disability 101 over and over and over again. And now here we are back at the beginning having these same conversations again. But at the same time, if I can change one person's mind at a time, I feel like I've accomplished something that feels the most meaningful and the most important to me. And so I'm really grateful for that. You're right. It's exhausting, but rewarding as well. I never want to come at it as being a downer. I always want, the personal is political. Oh my gosh, that's such a good point. 100%. I don't know if you want to weigh in on that sentiment at all, Bisma. You're more than welcome to.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I think it goes back to that balance that you were talking about between pushing to recognize your wholeness while at the same time getting people into the door, into the conversation of what disability access through all its different intersections of wholeness look like too. So yeah, and to say that gratification is something that I have felt too in my organizing work of what it looks like to turn one person in your direction and to hold that collective space with them. It definitely shows that the personal is political there.
I really appreciate that point. And I'm glad to be able to hold space for that tonight, for sure. So I'd love to go on to my second selection. And then after that, I'll give a little bit of context for that. And then we'll open it up to some Q&A. I would love to welcome you to ask any questions that you might have, to engage. Talking at people is not my favorite thing. I would much rather hear from other people and learn from other people. So I'm glad you're all joining me in that. But as for the second reading selection that I chose, it's actually much deeper into the book. It is the concluding chapter. And so I tried to be robust in choosing selections. The introduction, because where's our starting point? It's meeting people where they're at. But where's our end point? Our end point is that hopefully we've got new allies and we've got new people who are willing to work alongside us as accomplices in the work. And I think that all too often, as disabled people, and I speak not knowing how many of us in this group identify as disabled or not, but I know that when I speak for myself, being disabled doesn't mean that I'm absolved of also doing the work of supporting other disabled people. And that's something that we forget all too often, right? We tend to assume that if we have the experience of being marginalized in a particular way, that means that we must get it. That means that we understand what it's like to be another person, that we understand what it's like to occupy any other person's existence, right? But that's just not true. I only know what it's like to be me. And so I wanted to choose a second reading that really underscores this point and talks about some of the actions that we can take to all be better allies and supporters of each other. And so that's how the book really wraps up, is with giving concrete calls to action, because it's one thing to take in all of this knowledge about disability, to begin that learning journey, or to include my book on your learning journey, right? But that's certainly not the only thing to do when it comes to learning about disability. And so I didn't want to just let people fall off that cliff, right? Where it's like, here, I've given you all this knowledge, and now what are you supposed to do with it? So I shared some insights in regard to how we can actually take meaningful action towards being an ally. And I think the most important thing that I can underscore here is that allyship is about action. I consider allyship very much to be a verb. It's not really a title that you give yourself. I don't think you just get to slap a sticker on yourself and say, you know, I was a good ally today because I corrected somebody's language that was ableist, or, you know, I held the door open for somebody with a visible disability, right? Or I empathized with a person today. And I really hope that I'm preaching to the choir, but at the same time, I think it bears repeating that disabled people often very much get into our own heads and forget that we too can be very good allies to other people in the community. So on that note, I see, Bisma, you shared a comment. I don't know if you wanted to comment on that at all before I do the reading, or.
I just really liked the point that you made about ally being a verb, and that it's action driven, empowered, and that it's not like that binary of you are this or you aren't this. It depends on how much you're putting behind your actions. And so yeah, just love that.
Yeah, and you know, I don't mean to sound like a cliche, but something that I think about a lot is that allyship is a journey and not a destination. And it's not like I'm the originator of that thought process by any means. That's not, you know, my original thinking, but it's something that I've come to use to inform my work, because if we look at something as a destination, that means that we can stop doing the work at some point. And so on that note, I would love to read the excerpt about what we can all do to be better allies. So this is from page 144 and 145 of the book. If you are in a position of privilege, rather than using that position to amplify your own voice, ask yourself whose perspectives are missing from the conversation. Then lift up and amplify the perspectives of those people who should be centered instead. This isn't necessarily just about keeping quiet and listening, though that's always a crucial part. It's often also about actively redirecting people who may be overstepping or who are ignoring the perspectives of disabled people entirely. It's about ensuring that disabled people are respectfully given the platforms, opportunities, and space to make our messages known. We need to remember that passing the mic isn't something that only non-disabled people need to do. Disabled people aren't off the hook. All of us must recognize the ways in which we are both marginalized and privileged, and to know when to step up and when to step back. I asked author and artist Naomi Ortiz, whose poignant work focuses on disability justice, intersectionality, and self care for activists, what we all need to understand about passing the mic. It is not a one time thing, she said. It's a series of choices to build relationships, learn together, disagree without silencing the other. It's about building up our capacity to honor difference and appreciate the messiness. And that quote honestly has filled up my own cup so many times when I have felt depleted of energy as an activist. Please check out Naomi Ortiz's work. I'm going to drop a link in the chat because I just think that she is such an incredible disability justice activist, and her work is so important. So I'm gonna leave a link to that. But in the meantime, I think we have a whole bunch of questions. Is that right? Or did anybody want to share or respond?
I can respond briefly too. Yeah, I just really liked what you held up in that final section, especially thinking about how Black and Brown disabled bodies are treated in our system, and how many of them end up in carceral settings as well. And so uplifting that sort of intersectionality and that wholeness, and so to recognize that privilege shouldn't be a place of comfort while it is. And so, yeah, it just, the last part that you shared about uplifting those voices and those perspectives is so important. So thank you for making space for that in your book as well.
Yes, and really all credit to Naomi for such an incredible point. I feel very, very lucky that I was able to engage with Naomi's work. And I see in the chat we have the title of Naomi's book shouted out, Sustaining Spirit Self-Care for Social Justice. And I think we all could use a little self-care when it comes to doing social justice work. So I really encourage you to dive deep into her book as well. So now I think we have a bunch of questions that actually came in. Is that right?
Yeah, I believe we do. I'm gonna go back to see what they are. I know that Sheila Hillstrom had asked, what made you read the book?
So in terms of what made me write the book, I have to be honest, it was actually not me who initially came up with the idea. Back in 2019, when we were in, gosh, a different world, maybe not so different after all, but it feels like it. And I was on a podcast doing, a very disability 101 kind of conversation. And there's some fun noises. Um, so in having that disability 101 conversation and putting myself out there in that way, my literary agent, the woman who became my literary agent, actually tuned into that podcast, and she herself is disabled, and she reached out to me and she said, hey, I would love if you would consider working with me. Have you ever thought of writing a book? And for me, as somebody who, prefers not to really take up space, initially I was like, maybe in the distant future. And then it actually occurred to me that I wanted to write the story of what it's like to be a disabled daughter of a disabled mom. And so that was the initial story that I put together. And then my agent came back to me and said, this is a beautiful story, but have you considered that there's a gap right now in the market around a book that offers just the basics of disability, some of the things that we don't talk about because we don't have the tools to talk about them. And so we're afraid to dive deeper into disability. And so she supported me in shaping the idea for this book, which was really just a way to bridge that gap, because there's such a wealth of disability knowledge and resources out there, but how do we find those? How do we find our way to them if we don't have the language to use, if we don't have the tools to communicate about disability? And so I know I'm just one person filling that gap, but I'm glad to have created something that allows and enables people to begin these conversations.
Thank you for that. Yeah, it shows that language is power, and our ability to communicate is in line with our ideas of what storytelling is. So thank you for uplifting that and sharing your personal journey and vulnerability through this whole process. And so Wanda also said, you have a unique and important perspective as a disabled daughter of a disabled mother. Thank you for sharing, and definitely want to echo that sentiment. And for folks on the call right now, if you do have any questions, I'll invite you to drop them in the chat or to raise your hand, and I'll alternate between questions that were sent in advance and those who want to pose questions in this live version as well. And so if there isn't any questions right now, I'll keep going and deferring to the questions we have had prepared.
And we got so many questions in advance. I just feel like I should say thank you to the people who took the time to ask questions as they were registering for the event. It was such a lineup. I was really impressed with everyone's thoughtfulness. So thank you. Although I do see a question in the chat. Should we switch to that one first and then go back to the other ones?
Yeah, let's do it. Okay, so Katrina shared, I am a speech language pathologist and a professor. What do you think is something people who work with individuals with disabilities should learn about and keep in their mind in our careers?
That's a really, really good question. Thank you, Katrina. And it's something that I think about all the time, in regard to the fact that there are so many people who have loved ones who are disabled, who are caregivers of disabled people, who provide support for disabled people, medical care, services, whatever the case may be. But we so often lack the nuanced training when it comes to disability. It's not something that is taught in medical schools, right? And I don't mean that you teach disability, I mean that you teach about the experience of disability and how it overlaps with all of the other important work that you're doing, right? Because anybody can be disabled. Any patient who comes to you can be disabled. And, when it comes to providing therapies like speech language pathology, thinking about disability in terms of a whole person and understanding that you might work with a client for a half an hour to an hour a day, but that client is a person 24 hours a day, right? They come to that therapy session with a range of experiences. Perhaps they come to that therapy session knowing that somebody has mocked them for the way that they communicate, knowing that they are looked down upon for the way that they communicate, right? I have immense privilege in being able to communicate verbally, but that's not the only way to communicate with people. So I really, really encourage therapists and really anybody working with someone with a disability to rethink the notion that it's their job to fix or to cure or to repair, and instead to recognize that working with disabled people is like working with anybody else. You recognize the whole of their humanity. You meet them where they're at. That seems to be my phrase lately, meeting them where they're at. It's what I keep coming back to because I just can't get enough of reminding people that we all have to meet each other where we are. And if we presume that someone is coming to us because there's something wrong with them, because they're not a whole human being as they are, then, operating from that idea of deficit, I think is incredibly harmful, right? And so we have to avoid thinking of disability as deficit. Think of it as part of what makes somebody who they are. And then I think the other thing to keep in mind too is that if you yourself don't have a disability, continue to engage with the disability community, continue to learn about disability, right? Educate yourself about that experience, because without a more in-depth understanding of the disability experience, you're not really working with the whole person. You're not really acknowledging that disability is part of them. You're simply working around disability, and we don't want to do that. So that's my guidance, really, engaging with the community, learning from the community, and recognizing that disability does not necessarily mean deficit.
That's absolutely beautiful. And I think it resonates with me as someone who studied human biology in college, and recognizing that many science textbooks talked about disability as an abnormality, or as if like it deviates from normality, when in actuality we should be questioning what we're taking on as normal and recognizing that's not an accessible place to begin with. So thank
Right. Who decides what's normal?
you. Yeah. And so now we'll move on to our next question. that was prepared in advance from Michelle McGowan. And it is, what is the most pressing public policy issue facing the disability community today?
I'm going to cheat a little bit on this answer. So I suppose first I'll give the real pressing answer because it's literally happening like right now, live in action. Um, Disability advocates are grappling heavily with access to home and community-based services. I think that I would be really remiss if I didn't mention that first because there's literally a vigil that was going on around home and community-based services where advocates gathered to, um, you know, create space for the fact that the president is currently trying to focus on adding support for home and community-based services to the budget that he's trying to get passed. But unfortunately, it seems that those provisions may be on the chopping block. And so advocates are hard at work advocating to ensure that people with disabilities can receive services, in home and community-based settings as opposed to in nursing facilities or institutionalized settings. So that's pressing and urgent and incredibly important. That being said, when I said I was going to cheat a little bit, in terms of what the most pressing policy issue is, I just don't really think it's fair to pick one because every issue is a disability issue. Every issue affects disabled people, whether we're talking about education, employment, voting rights, transportation, healthcare, you name it. It's a disability issue because there are disabled people in this world who are impacted by policy and legislation. And so while yes, there are crucial disability issues that we need to be talking about specifically, like in the case of home and community-based services, although certainly disabled people are not the only ones impacted by access to home and community-based services. I think that we need to look at policy more holistically and recognize that disability is not something that should be an afterthought in any of the legislation that we're pushing for, but rather something that's folded into all of the legislation that we're working on. So that is my answer. And I hope it's not cheating to say that every policy issue is a disability issue because I really believe that. And I also just wanted to say I love that there's like people helping each other out in the chat. That makes me really happy.
Thank you for your full thoughts on that. And we'll move on to the next chat question then. So Mackenzie shared, I am a non-disabled person who volunteers to coach an adapted hockey team for disabled adults and children. What are some ways that non-disabled people can advocate and support the disabled community without tokenizing? I find that amongst other organizations in my community that tokenism is so prominent, and my organization strives to ensure that doesn't happen.
I think that that's such an important question. And I think that tokenizing is something that we can fall into so easily if we're not careful by pointing to one disabled person and saying this one disabled person has this one opinion that we're going to share, and this one opinion is going to shape all of the work that we do, and it's going to inform all of our thinking, and thank you disabled person for giving of your knowledge, right? I feel like I try to avoid falling into that trap a lot. If I do something where I'm consulting or if I'm speaking or if I'm even just in conversation and giving advice, I always, remind people that if you say, well, Emily said this, well, no, I'm not the token for the whole disability community. So I think that's the first trap that we have to avoid falling into, is only turning to one voice or one perspective when it comes to shaping what we do. And also keeping in mind the mantra that so much of the disability community holds on to, which is nothing about us without us. And I remind people of that so often because I think that there are so many well-meaning people who really want to speak on behalf of or for the disability community without recognizing that you should instead be working with and alongside the disability community. And that is an easy trap to fall into when you say, oh, but I have a brother, I have a sister, I have a cousin, I have an uncle, you know, I have a degree in special education, right? I have qualifications and certifications in this. And so, you know, we forget that if we're not bringing disabled people not only to the table, but making sure that table is accessible and making sure that they're at the head of the table, you know, and only really including disabled people as what some of my friends call quote unquote window dressing in the work that you're doing, you know, where you put them out front, but they're not involved in the meaningful work behind the scenes, you know, then I think that's how we end up tokenizing. But if disabled people are really thoroughly involved throughout all of your processes, that's not tokenizing, that's just inclusion. And of course, compensating disabled people, you know, for their work. I would be really, really a bad activist if I didn't say that, right? Especially because it's National Disability Employment Awareness Month. So, you know, include disabled people, compensate disabled people, and ensure that disabled people are taking the lead whenever possible.
Thank you for that. And so, yeah, just loved what you shared about it all, and also just recognizing all the different ways that disability can intersect with race, with gender, with other sorts of identities, and to make sure that our work doesn't just stop at one place, but is a continuous storytelling journey and a journey of total inclusion.
That's such a vital point that I feel like I need to underscore it. And thank you for bringing it up, because I feel remiss for not having brought it up. But I appreciate that so much, because yes, that's a trap. Again, a trap we fall into. There can be lots of traps, and I don't mean that in a threatening way. I just mean, you know, let's be mindful of the work that we're doing, right? Let's not just look at disability in a vacuum, in a bubble. Let's not, you know, act as though disability doesn't connect to every other identity, doesn't cut across every other identity, because it does.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And yeah, to echo what Peter has shared in the chat, feel free to also raise your hand. It's a feature in the reactions panel at the bottom of your screen, or if you're on the phone, I believe it's *6 to raise your hand. But go ahead and do that if you also just want to ask your question live with us. And with that being said, I'll move on to our next question that was prepared in advance while folks find those buttons to see if they have their thoughts ready. And so we have a question and comment from Judah Rosenstein. First, thank you for your advocacy and continued success. And their question is, there is still a great deal of stigma associated with disability, and that is especially true regarding disabilities resulting from illness and conditions that are not visible on the surface, though they cause debilitating pain, or which are not easily diagnosable by conventional medical tests. Can you please touch on what to say or how to be an ally to such folks?
I think that this is a really great question, and something that I obviously want to give the caveat that I experience a very visible physical disability. And so much of how I experience disability is shaped by the fact that people can see my existence as a disabled woman. And so I think in many ways that allows me to have a degree of believability, and it shouldn't be like that, but you know, there's evidence of my disability, right? Whereas there are so many people who experience chronic illnesses, chronic pain, non-visible disabilities, right? Cognitive disabilities, for example, that may not be visible, learning disabilities. And so there's this assumption that you have to look a certain way in order to somehow qualify as being disabled to be believed. And in terms of how best to be an ally, you know, first of all, remember that we can't demand information of anyone. So, you know, if somebody discloses something to you, if somebody shares of themselves and their experiences, that's one thing, you know, but never push anybody to reveal if they experience a disability, if it's not something that they want to open up about, right? But at the same time, I think we can come at conversations in such a way that we're not making assumptions about someone's disability status. We're not assuming that they're disabled or non-disabled. We come at it by assuming that all human beings have needs that we can meet and we can do our best to support them. And that's not meant to erase disability, certainly, but rather to create a world that's more accessible for everybody. And so if you are planning an event, for example, and you are thinking about ways in which you can make the event sensory friendly. So perhaps you have a quiet room where people can go if they need to decompress. Um, you're not necessarily saying, please raise your hand if you have a disability that impacts you from a sensory standpoint, right? You're just saying, I have already created something where you are welcome, where it is accessible to you. And so it goes back to my favorite phrase, meet people where they're at, but to do that, you don't necessarily need to have all this insider knowledge about something deeply personal to someone, and you don't have to demand that someone share of themselves in order for you to believe them. Instead, just, start from a standpoint of creating a more accessible world for everybody so that that's not something that people feel obligated or compelled to disclose about themselves.
So important. And I absolutely loved that it's the intention of creating spaces for accommodation ahead of time rather than waiting for the ask to appear, and to offer compassion. Yeah. When those needs aren't met, and to find ways to do it together. I love it.
Can I just keep you with me at all times so that you can say what I said, but better? and more concisely and with more impact and power. I mean, you're fantastic. Like I sincerely mean it. and just, and also adding your own points and elevating your own points as well. And I'm really grateful for that. So thank you, Bisma.
I appreciate you, and your vulnerability opens me up to be vulnerable as well. So thank you for opening up a safe space for me too. And so with that, I'll wait to see if there's any other questions from the audience, the live audience here on the Zoom. And if not, I'll move on to another one of the advanced prepared questions. Ooh, I see that Stephanie has raised their hand.
Oh, exciting.
Hi, yes, I have. Thank you so much for your insights. I am learning so much right now, and I really appreciate this. I am currently a master's student, in Taiwan, but I'm originally from Colombia, but I've lived in the US. It's a weird mixture. But anyway, I am a non-disabled person, and right now my research is focusing on the experiences and perceptions of people with disabilities, and their specifically their experiences with sexuality education curriculum in schools. And my main concern is how, through this research, I've noticed how my upbringing and my interactions in society, they're very ableist. And I'm very aware of that now. And going into my research, I am so concerned about power dynamics, and I'm so concerned about how I would work with the people with disabilities, specifically here also in Taiwan because of the cultural differences. But really my question is, if in your experience, if you've encountered any common faults committed by researchers when working with the disability community. And again, this is coming from a power dynamics perspective, and these common pitfalls that researchers fall into. And a lot of the research that I've read is that a lot of times people with disabilities that are part of research, they're just almost just used and then discarded, and the data is only collected, and they're not really, people are not appreciated as people, they're just appreciated as subjects. And so that's something that I'm thinking about, but I wanted to also, know more about your perspective on that. Thank you.
Oh my gosh, Stephanie, that's such a thoughtful question. And I'm so excited by it, and excited to, see what work is to come from you. But I think first of all, and I don't say this like, oh, you get a cookie, right? I don't mean it in this way, but you do very much deserve acknowledgement for the fact that you are being mindful and thinking about this. It's not a place that everybody who works with the disability community or who studies the disability community, that's not where they start from. I think about this a lot in terms of power dynamics. Disabled people are often seen as, problems to be fixed, or, things to be cured, right? Or objects to study. We're really objectified in so many ways. People are constantly trying to figure us out and make sense of us and turn us into science projects. And goodness knows that I, as someone with a genetic physical disability, have willingly participated in some of this, but that doesn't mean that at times I don't still feel kind of like an object when it comes to how researchers look at me or how the medical profession looks at me. And so trying to find that balance within myself is challenging. But knowing that there are people who already recognize the risks that come with creating that power dynamic where you're sort of looking at disabled people. There's a quote from autistic activist Jim Sinclair, as self-narrating zoo exhibits, right? um being conscious of that is the first step, and I think that the second step is, again, not just researching disability, but instead really immersing yourself in learning more about disability. Um, what I mean by that is, it's one thing to study disability, to write a paper on it. It's another thing to really come to a broader understanding of the lived experience of disability, and to recognize that whatever you're studying is not necessarily something that's happening in isolation. So if you're studying the particular effects of something on disabled people, how are other identities within the people that you're studying also impacting their experiences, right? How are you looking at them as a whole human being? And we forget ourselves so easily, especially in these academic spaces. And I admit fully, I'm not an academic. I tried hard to occupy that space and then found myself wanting to leave that space because I didn't really want to um, turn everything into something academic, right? But I also really respect that there's so much work to be done to further our understanding of disability. But in order to do that, we can't forget that we're not looking at objects, we're looking at human beings.
Thank you so much. It's a very lovely response, actually, and it does give me a different perspective. And I mean, that's part of the reason why I'm here as well. I want to not just see this as research, but yes, you're right, as human connection. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Stephanie.
And good luck on your academic endeavors. I feel like you're headed in the right space if you're asking these questions already. And to uplift that Katrina shared, intersectionality is so important, and we don't address that at all in our research. Yeah, I think thinking about storytelling and how that is something so foreign in academic spaces is also something to delve into, and whether or not those things are compatible with each other. And so with that, I'll move on to one of the advanced prepared questions, and also inviting other folks to drop theirs in the chat or raise their hand the way that Stephanie did. And so the next question was given by Amy Christian. Parents and caregivers of disabled children are often criticized. I'll speak for myself. I am a non-disabled parent of a disabled child who wants to learn from disabled people how to best advocate for and with my daughter. What do you recommend?
Oh my gosh, this makes my heart so full, because this is something I try to talk about so often. I think that there's a bit of a rivalry, or maybe more than a bit of a rivalry, between a lot of parent and caregiver communities. and disability advocacy communities. And I'm going to use the phrase that I keep using, meeting people where they're at, but my goodness, it just feels so relevant tonight. I am very much of the belief that there is a way to meet in the middle. I have found that there are disability advocates who can at times be very alienating towards parents who are really just trying to navigate and understand the disability experience. And I have found that there are parents who push back very angrily and say that they are the expert on their child's experience rather than acknowledging that it is, in fact, the human who embodies that experience that is the expert on that experience. Although parents are certainly, by proximity, very, very much filled with knowledge on disability experience, but that's not actually the same thing as embodying disability, right? You're bearing witness to it, you're providing caregiving, but it's not your physical or cognitive experience. And so what I have really always encouraged is taking time to listen to and learn from, first of all, the disability community, right? To immerse yourself in disability related media, in reading, in writing, in social media, whatever your preferred mode of communication is. But most importantly, to be in communication with the person in your care, with your child, right? And, people always push back at me and they say, what if my child is nonverbal, or they don't communicate in the same way that you do, and so it's not fair that you're saying this, but at the same time I don't have this privilege of being able to communicate with my child in the same way. And to that I say, communication doesn't look like just how I'm communicating with you right now. There's more than one way to communicate. And it's really incumbent upon caregivers to take the time to listen to whatever that communication looks like, and to find ways to honor what your child is trying to tell you, and, to take from the disability community what it is that you find valuable, to listen to their experiences and their perspectives, not to speak over the disability community or to speak over or for your child, but to really meet in the middle. I think that's what it takes. And it's not always easy. It's messy. I think it goes back to the quote that I read from Naomi Ortiz about really honoring that messiness and those spaces in between. And to do that, I think that we have to recognize that keeping open dialogue going is the best way that we can be of support.
Thank you so much for uplifting all of that, the observing versus living, and respecting autonomy. And so I think we have time for a final question, and I see that Shelley Nearing, your hand is up. Would you like to ask?
Yes, I work can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay.
Hi, Shelley.
Hi. So I work for, I live in Canada, so I work for the government of Alberta, and I'm autistic, so I also have a disability. And my sister's also developmentally delayed through something at birth. So I understand through a sibling, and as own lived experience, I was discovered last year because I was missed my whole life. So what I deal with, I really like meeting them where they're at, because I do deal with a lot of cultural ableism and parents trying to fix their child. And I'm working, trying to really hard. That's where my question is, what would your advice be working with trying to help parents realize that, like, if they have really high support needs, that we can't fix them. They're going to be the best little Johnny. We'll try to make them or help them be the best little Johnny they can be, but we're not going to make him or her or them a track star. They're not going to be an academic. Trying to not lower expectations, but I'm not trying. How would you suggest dealing with parents' expectation that we're going to fix their child? Because I don't want to fix their child. I just want to make them the best that they can be, and talk about functional communication, not speaking like that's.
Oh, Shelly, I wish I could just like reach through the computer and give you a hug if that was something that you were okay with, because
Yeah.
this is just something that I talk about so much. I've given, whole presentations on the expectations that we have around disability, and how we have often these very high expectations and these very low expectations, and we don't have this reasonable in between where we have realistic expectations for every person based on who they are as a human being. And I am so passionate about this. And I also feel like I want to acknowledge that you specifically said high support needs and not high functioning, because I'm very adamant about not using functioning labels, as I'm sure you are as well, because of the language that you chose. I think that functioning labels are just arbitrary standards of normalcy that we place on people for no good reason. And support needs is a much more accurate way of talking about it. And in terms of expectations, I think that there's this interesting multi-sided approach that I try to take when I talk about this. So on the one hand, we should not assume that disabled people cannot live a full life. But on the other hand, we have often very ableist, arbitrary standards of what it means to live a full life. And so what I always ask people to think about is the fact that we need to re-examine what it means to live a full life. That, I think, is where we get stuck so often. This assumption that, to live a full life, you need to become the track star, right? Become the neuroscientist, or even just get married, have kids, get a college degree, get a house, right? I mean, who decided that this is what we need to be doing in life in order for it to be a full life? And so I think that while we can advocate for the fact that disabled people certainly can do many of these things if they want to, they also need to exist in this space of realistic expectations for that person's mind and that person's body. And that's what I try to explain to people. Like, my parents did not raise me to think that I was going to one day get up like Forrest Gump, start running, right? Like I would be free of my mobility equipment and just start running. Like that was not how I was raised. It was like, so you can't do this. Let's instead focus on what you can do and embrace that, instead of being like, no, one day you're just going to get up and like run the minute mile.
Yeah.
That's so unrealistic. So
And
I'm glad you brought that up.
And
Okay.
I have a master's in disability and community studies from UC, University of Calgary. I didn't know I was autistic until a year ago. I was discovered. I lived most of my life masking, and now that I'm authentically myself, I'm in a much better place. And I want to become an advocate and change. I'm trying to change within the government of Alberta of stuff that we can change, like language. And I've called people out. I work in social services. I had just a side note. Sorry, I don't mean to, like, it's
Please,
ridiculous.
this is the conversation.
Somebody, a social worker, said autistic people don't know they're disabled, and nobody spoke out about that. And this is a room full of people that have social work degrees, psychology degrees, community rehab degrees. They said nothing. And I called her out, or educated her. My husband likes me to say call out, not so good work. But I said something to her, or call in, yes, sorry. I called her in. But I'm like, no, we do know. Like, I'm not out to everyone at work because the ableism, but I'm becoming more comfortable being more out about it, because autism is still very stereotyped in, and I'm trying to break those stereotypes.
Yeah, and I mean, you said, you're trying to become an advocate, but I would say, you already very much are, even in just the consciousness that you have and how you communicate about all of this. And so I'm really thrilled, to know that this is something that you're thinking about. And my goodness, don't hesitate to reach out if you want to talk more about the expectations that we are constantly placing upon disabled people, because I could, as Mackenzie said, yeah, I could talk about this for hours. So, and thank you also for feeling like this was a safe space to disclose of yourself as well. I really appreciate that.
Also, support local or people with disabilities on Patreon, like Emily and Kyle on Patreon, and other people that do podcasts. They're like the audacious autistics. My special interest is disability justice and human rights intersectionality of that, because that is the first people who are marginalized or racialized individuals with disabilities, and we need their voices at the forefront.
I didn't pay Shelley to say any of that.
No.
I can't, but thank you, Shelley. And Bisma, do we have time for one more question, or do you feel?
I think maybe we should transition into just closing thoughts.
Yeah.
Allow for folks put the full time that we have.
Yes, and to process.
Yeah, and to know that this conversation doesn't end and start and end with this space, but it has a life outside of it as well. But yeah, I'll invite you to share any final thoughts.
Gosh, I feel like the only final thoughts that I have are that my thoughts are not the final ones, if that makes sense. I very much believe that, everyone who took the time to be here tonight, to be so generous and giving of themselves to, be open and vulnerable, whether, speaking or in the chat, or even just to take the time to listen. I'm incredibly grateful, because we all need to start somewhere. And, if this is not your starting point, if you are already immersed in the work, then we all need to continue moving forward. So wherever you might be in that work, I'm really grateful for all of you. And I'm excited to get to be in community with so many wonderful people who are equally as passionate about making the world a more inclusive and accessible place. So let's just keep doing that together.
Yeah, thank you so much for those final words. And it was truly a gift to share this space with you and to kind of hear and participate in so many conversations of how disability, ability, and inclusion can look. Yeah, and thank you to everyone who shared. I'm sorry for everyone whose questions we didn't get to. There were so many sentiments in the chat, as well as questions prepared in advance that we didn't get to. But thank you for everyone who did stick around, because we will be raffling off one of Emily Ladau's books as well. So one of you lucky people will get a copy based on Peter from SDA's randomized calculation on the people in this Zoom call.
How fun is that? And I'm also, so that nobody feels cut off, I am putting my social media in the chat. I really could care less about followers. I'm just giving you places to contact me.
You swear.
I swear. Okay, over to you, Peter. And
all right, well, of course. I have two very fun, exciting jobs to close this out with. So yes, the raffle is coming up. One lucky person remaining in this audience will be sent a copy of the book. We'll just need to get your address from you if we don't already have it. But before that, first, just want to say another word about how can you get involved in SDA, right? Lots of amazing people on this call, lots of people hopefully wondering, how do I make these readings happen? How do I work with SDA on these campaigns to transform the world that we're living in, right? the best way to do that is to become a member. I'll put the link in the chat. We'll share it in follow up. And to have a one-on-one with one of the organizers, to get involved with one of the campaign groups, whether you're here in the Bay Area or whether you're out in the world elsewhere, Australia, we got something for you to do, right? There's always work to be done to tackle the issues that we're working on around housing, healthcare, transit, mental health, and to do events like this, building community and coming together so that we can support one another and learn and live and love together. All the beautiful things that this event really brought out in all of us. Whether that's, you're out in the Bay Area and you're helping expand long-term supports and services, fighting on state and federal level issues, whether you're participating in business social media, SDU, Senior Disability University, that's coming up, helping run this book series, or maybe joining part of our newly disabled and ill cohort, folks who may have become disabled or ill recently during the pandemic. We're building a special space for folks to come together and to organize together. So again, we'll put that link. It looks like the link is popping in the chat. There's lots of good links going in the chat. Fantastic. The other one very exciting thing that I have to share about organizing with SDA, taking action with SDA, is our free Wi-Fi campaign. So our members have been organizing for the past 9-10 months now to build a campaign to push for free Wi-Fi in San Francisco for seniors and people with disabilities, starting in San Francisco, using that as a model to push forward, right? To challenge large corporations like AT&T, where CEOs leave with $64 million pension plans, not to mention the $21 million they can make in a year before that. And we'll be having a rally for anyone who can join us in person in downtown San Francisco on Monday, March 18th. Geez, wow. Monday, October 18th. And of course, there will also be a Zoom component, and because we want as many people to be able to participate in this as possible, whether they're in San Francisco, elsewhere, whether they can be there in person or not. So again, all the links are in the chat. Excited. Now here comes, drum roll please, give me a minute to cue this raffle up and we'll find out who our lucky winner is. Right. Our lucky winner is Allison Kanashiro. Congratulations, Allison. Allison, we will just need to get your address. We might have it through the Eventbrite already, but if we don't, we'll follow up with you via email, or you can just chat it to me right now directly, and we'll send you that copy of Demystifying Disability. Woo! Yay! Okay.
That's
I'm
so
done.
exciting.
Thanks, everyone. All you, Visma and Emily.
Yay, thank you so much. And for folks who do want to join SDA, I invite you to stay after our programmed call and we can actually make that happen over the Zoom screen together. But also want to pass it over to Emily and thanking you for being such a gracious and compassionate speaker, and really opening up the space for vulnerability and to hear so many stories in this hour and a half. So thank you for being here with us.
Oh my gosh, thank you. This was, I am not even kidding, one of the most fun events I've done in a while, because it just felt very real and authentic and go with the flow, tech difficulties and all, right? It was just very real life. And I'm so grateful that we were all able to share space together tonight. So thank you so, so much. And I mean, take Bisma up on that offer to stay after to become a member.
Thank you so much. And I'll also drop my email in the chat in case anyone wants to connect after the event and get involved in any of the myriad of things that Peter shared, whether that's joining us in getting more authors featured in our disability book reading series, joining our free Wi-Fi things, or any of the stuff, the breadth of things that we do. But yeah, also want to invite folks to drop how they're feeling in the chat with us, any parting words of wisdom they're taking with them, the stories that they heard, the lessons they have learned. And yeah, thank you for sharing space with all of us. Also, our disability team, our ASL interpreters, Andy and Shante, our closed captioner, Sarah, you all made this event as wonderful as it is, and for folks to participate in all their sorts of ways. So thank you for being such amazing troopers in this hour and a half.
Yay, everyone. That was practically like a curtain call. That was fun. Oh, someone said, can all Zooms feel like this? Great job, organizers. Shout out to you, Peter and Visma, for putting this together.
Sweet, folks. Very sweet. Appreciate everyone moving through those technical difficulties together. We're all in it together.
And everybody go become a member of SDA, because goodness knows, I realized that I am a failure because I'm not a member. So I'm doing it right now.
Amazing.
Signing up live.
Ooh, David is asking, hi David, good to see you, is asking where he can get a copy of the book. What's your preferred site, Emily? Do you have a bookshop?
I'm a particularly big fan of supporting local bookstores. I really hope that everybody will do that, but if Amazon is more accessible, I'm also all about that. So you do you, but I will drop it in the chat.
Awesome.
There you go.
Beautiful.
Perfect. And I see that Peter also dropped in the link on the site that you can join to become a member. And so all we ask is for you to send some sort of yearly amount to actually support all of our excellent rallies and campaigns and things of that sort. And going to also invite, if there are any members, I'm not sure. Oh, I don't think there are any members apart from like me, Peter, and Jessica, to share their experiences on what makes SDA so great.
David, can we put you on the spot? Mr. David Williams, longtime member, former peer advocate, miss you. There he is.
Let's spotlight David.
Let's spotlight David.
Oh, and someone wants to meet my mom too. So if my mom's still watching, she can take her video off, or she can put her video on if she wants to. But I want to hear from David.
You want to hear what from me? What did I miss?
I think Bisma, you were just saying, like, if you want to say a word about like why you're an SDA member, and like, you know, why you got involved in the first place, that could be powerful for folks to hear and get a sense of.
I hate being put on the spot. That's what got me into this whole mess. Well, SDS is an organization that's doing advocacy work and activism in the Bay Area for people with disabilities and seniors, primarily on a local level, like nobody else we know. I mean, there are, between all the different programs they run, all the different activities they do, actions they do, rallies they do, and now the educational things as well, like book readings, but they're also expanding the projects they do into, into dealing with directly, not just with ableism, but with racism, with, poverty, with, should we say, all the inherent dangers of capitalism. And it's the way it's oppressing people. They're an organization that helps us organize and break out of it.
Thank you
deal
so
with it.
much, David.
This is why we spotlighted you, David. This is why we put you on the spot. You got to stop saying great things like that. Otherwise we're going to keep doing it.
I may have convinced my mom to poke her head in and say hi before we say goodnight.
Yay, I'm excited.
May have convinced. She's
Oh,
on the other-
Hannah is here. Hannah's also a member. Just, because David doesn't have to be the only one we totally put on the spot.
Balance in all things.
I just have a question, because my funds are in Canadian, and I get hammered on conversion. How does that work? work? Like with, because do you work on stuff that is like, would it be like is it just national level, or could it be like North American level?
That's a really good question, and I think one that we're all trying to explore. I think much of the work, and you being here is also a tribute that much of this work, the conversation on ableism, on racism, on all these things have a global lens as well. And so I'd say that if it is possible, you could join our disability book reading circles, and we have different commitments in terms of like with our mental health. Mad Mob group is currently doing outreach for long COVID. So folks who are developing disability or realizing they have disability in the new, in the real, and allowing space for that. And so, yeah, and a lot of the issues, though they are locally focused within the San Francisco East Bay area, can transcend past. For instance, I'm leading a digital organizing SDU, which is our Senior and Disability University. And so that's specifically geared at increasing social media understanding among community members, especially elder folks who may not necessarily have grown up in a digital age. And so those classes are open to anyone and everyone who's able to access our Zoom. And so, yeah, and so inviting all of those experiences, all those people that you have in community with you to our organizing spaces at SDA.
That's so cool. That's amazing. And I have my favorite senior disabled person.
That's what I am, senior disabled person. Okay, I'm leaving now.
But I just want to know really quickly. So I'm pointing to the screen, but this is Jessica, who is the executive director of the organization.
Hi.
And was kind enough to reach out to help put this together. Sorry, my mom keeps getting blurry, but this is my mama. She's pretty great. She gets getting blurry, but she's wonderful and I love her.
Thank you. This was.
Thank you for raising Emily.
Yeah.
You did a good job.
Well,
If you say so
if
myself.
you do so, yeah. I think we're all pretty proud of her.
No, but thank you. And we are both, I'm sorry she's blurry again, but we are both gonna be more involved as well. So
Yeah, that's amazing.
Excuse me, can I say something?
oh my gosh, yeah, of course.
Hi, Monique.
Hello.
All right.
I-
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Bye. Nice meeting you all.
I think this was a very good talk. I really like it.
I think this was a very good talk. I really liked it.
Yes, but the problem why I don't ask questions is I need somebody to read voice for me. And it's hard in spaces like this.
The reason I don't ask questions is because I need someone to revoice for me, and it's hard in spaces like this.
Yeah, yes.
I totally get that, Monique, although I will say I was following along with what you were saying, and I'm always happy to give the space that someone needs to take the time that they need to ask questions. So I hope that maybe you will feel more empowered to ask questions, because everybody should give you the space that you need to communicate.
And I really like what you were talking about, because a lot of people don't talk about what you talk about. It was very good.
I'm sorry, Monique, can you repeat that?
I was like, a lot of people don't talk about what she was talking about. I think it was really good. I liked it.
Did you say you loved the way she was talking about what she was talking about?
Yes, because people don't really talk about it a lot.
Because people don't really talk about disability a lot.
Yeah, I hear you on that, Monique. I think that, it's not a conversation that we're having enough of, and especially not one that we're opening spaces to be inclusive. I think, right, like I said the whole time, I'm one person, but there's so many more voices in this community. So thank you for staying after, and for feeling comfortable to speak.
Thank you, Jessica.
And Monique, I want to add on if you have any thoughts on how we can make sure that this space and really all spaces are more accessible for folks with communication disabilities, please let us know.
I think you have to like you never speak up and say, I'm willing to revoice for you.
You need people who are willing to revoice for you.
For anybody who got difficult speech, you should say that in the beginning.
If we say that at the beginning and make clear,
That's
it's a
smart.
good suggestion. Concrete takeaway, yeah, for sure.
Actually really, really helpful. And I think I will do that going forward at any events as well, just offering that up as an option.
Yeah.
Thank you for speaking up on that, truly.
So SDA will definitely take that up too.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
I know. So it's my bedtime because
Yeah.
9:38 here. I'm on the East Coast. I'm not on the West Coast. So I am going to call it a night, but I'm just grateful to all of you truly. And let's not make this the last time we do something cool together.
And maybe what we can do is try to figure out some way to do Canada, America, agency-wide things, because people are going to travel again, and disability as boomers age, and things happen. It's going to be a bigger issue, and people are going to have to talk about it and have to make it present.
SDA Canada.
Yay.
I love it.
Yeah, thank you so much for
Thanks, Emily.
everyone's thoughts, and Emily for joining us past your bedtime. But to everyone else who has stayed on the call, I'd love to hear from you how you're feeling about what was shared about SDA, whether or not you want to join as a member today, or just want to hear more about the different sorts of programs and offerings we have. And we can speak more to that. Or if there's anyone already willing to commit to being a member, share that with us too.
If you get some information, I will sign up.
Oh, wow. Monique, do I hear that you will sign up?